Glyn Maxwell is a poet, playwright, novelist, librettist, and critic, and his volumes of poetry include The Breakage, Hide Now, and Pluto, all of which were shortlisted for either the Forward or the T.S. Eliot Prizes, and the Nerve, which won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize. His selected poems, 1000 Nights and Counting, was published on both sides of the Atlantic in 2011. And many of Glyn's plays have been staged in London and New York, including Liberty at Shakespeare's Globe and on the Armada, Arcola, RADA, and the Southwark Playhouse. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Glyn, and I'll see you afterwards.
Thank you. I'm assuming people can hear me and see me. I don't know if they can, but that's what makes it exciting. All I could see on the chat was two different people saying chat is disabled. And I didn't really understand that. I thought that might be a poem of Caroline's I didn't know that they were requesting, because it sounded like the sort of thing I'd like to read if it was a poem of yours. And if that's not the case, I'll assume that we're fixing that while I talk. So it's a delight and an honor to be here to introduce Caroline. I'm going to start in the traditional way by embarrassing the poet with a barrage of praise. But it's not the usual kind of praise, because it's not the usual kind of poet. And I'm certainly not going to throw up a list of dates and books and prizes, because saying a sensible list is exactly the sort of thing that suddenly appears ridiculous in the transforming light of Caroline's poetry, and ought immediately to be rendered as a different kind of list altogether. There are among many things in poetry that Caroline is among the best at, and some things she is the best at. One thing she's definitely best at is being mentioned by my students. For example, oh, it's from a class with Caroline Bird. Oh, that poem is from a prompt from Caroline Bird. I'm going for a sort of Caroline Bird vibe here, and so on. One of these days, one of my students will offer a portfolio entitled Poems Without Any Prompts from Caroline Bird at All. And they and I will smile at the joke while recognizing it to be remarkably high praise. Uniquely high praise, for how few among her contemporaries can be joked about like that in such a blend of affection and awe. I'll go further. Caroline is one of the few poets whose quality of attention to modern life is so sharp that her poetry registers the particularly unsettling impact of the age, by which I mean that this is an age that's like no other. High praise among poets usually settles for universality or timelessness, saying that such and such a poet is the such and such a poet of their day. But I think we're in an age where, on its own, that's not enough. We're at a time we couldn't see coming. People of the past had our kind of news. They had their COVIDs and Gazas and Trumps. The people of the past didn't have our kind of tech, and they didn't have our kind of climate. Caroline is not a surrealist, and I don't think her beloved James Tate was either. Because it's such a sunny evening, I think I just want to mention that I remember a sunny evening in Amherst, Massachusetts, probably in about 97, 98, at James Tate's house, because he also taught there then. And I remember drinking and smoking with him, which dates it a lot, because I haven't smoked for an awful long time. But I just love to think how proud Jim would be to know the effect that he had on this tremendous poet across the years and across the ocean. It gives me great delight. Anyway, I don't think it's surrealism. I think we've timed out surrealism, or we should have timed out surrealism. We should time out obscurity. Anyone who knows me knows I think all that. But I think Caroline writes in the tone of reason. Eliot praised Andrew Marvell for his tough reasonableness. I praise Caroline for her terrifying reasonableness. That voice from behind the wall, what Frost called the sound of sense, has a different application here. And this is the blazing originality that she brings. From behind the wall, this poetry sounds like sense. It moves like sense. But when it comes into earshot or eyeline, the nouns and verbs and protagonists have all slipped or swapped or lurched into unreason. But with this poetry, we get it. I could go on. I've already gone on. I've even gone on one. So all I'll say is, hosting a Zoom launch for Caroline instantly makes me wonder how Zoom itself might work as one of her poems. Something like all of us bringing our sitting rooms and kitchens and bedrooms into the same field, putting our hands over our mouths and all listening, which is a very good idea, but that's what we should do if we didn't have Zoom. But we have Zoom, and here we are. And by the way, if any of my students are here, and I see they are, you're not allowed to write that poem, because you wouldn't do it she would do it more interestingly than you, and more interestingly than me, which is the point I'm making. And at this point, it's time to say I'm honoured and delighted to introduce Caroline Bird.
Bloody hell. Thank you. Thank you very much, Glyn. And a little bit of that phrase will have, I'm sure, landed somewhere on my self-esteem, and will but at the moment it's a shock. Thank you. So God, now I have to read. Glyn, you've got to mute yourself. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to jump in with a poem before I ramble. This is called, well, it's not called Change Chat Settings to Everyone, that's for sure. Yes, it's called Starter Marriage. Everybody came to my first wedding. Smelly Neil from primary school played Splat the Rat with the skinhead girl who sold me fake ecstasy. The bodybuilders from Dad's porn films told jokes about potatoes to monochrome ancestors who'd perished in the Great Famine. After dinner, the midwife passed around the bloody forceps. The absent friends toast got a bit confusing as they all kept piping up, "I'm here." The lineup took hours, embracing every half-remembered person. The man from the secret photos in Mom's dresser, my teenage babysitter who jumped off a cliff at Flamborough Head, etc. Some faces were impossible to place. "I'm sorry," I said finally to one chap. "Who are you?" He looked at me, hurt. "I'm a BT operator. I kept you in a call queue for 40 minutes in 2007. "Of course," I said. "Listen," he said, "the band is playing our song." And they were. Greensleeves, instrumental, synthesized. "Wow," I said, "it takes me right back to being on hold with you." "I know," he said, "isn't that extraordinary?" And we danced together, reminiscing under a marquee of stars. Thank you. And thank you all for being here, by the way, even though it's such a gorgeous evening and you should all be throwing strawberries in the air and catching them in your mouths right now. And instead you're in front of this Zoom screen. So I hope you're all, in bikinis, waving giant leaves at yourselves, reclining. So before this launch, my wife, she said to me, "Make sure you tell them about all the themes in the book, because sometimes you have a way of just making it sound like the poems happened because you're a bit mad." And but the thing is, I think it's also because I write from the I, so they have this this first person sense of deranged confessional, which is, in some ways accurate. But I also don't sit down and think about themes. I don't sit down and think, right, I'm going to write a poem about my whole past catching up with me, or I'm going to write a poem about what it feels like to be a mother who hasn't given birth, or this is a poem about addiction and shame or anything. Most of these poems began with, when I say idea, I mean in the smallest sense, like just a what if. So yeah, what if everybody came to my first wedding, but literally everyone? And then the game of the first draft becomes about unraveling the implications of that seemingly silly idea. And very quickly, it's not that silly anymore, Or what if a woman gave birth to the reincarnation of Gilbert and Sullivan? What if my baby monitor was connected to someone else's baby? And then once you unravel the implications, they're much darker than the idea itself. The baby monitor. He snored, it screamed. He laughed, it let out this horrible throaty rattle. I read its stories, made a shoebox bed, spooned macaroni into its ports until it smelt like milky vomit, and I could never get it fully clean. I'm scared of you, it said, learning to talk, and you're a baddie. My boy reached rainbow level at preschool, then pot of gold, tied his own laces. But I sat through parents' evening like a killer in the dock, knowing the monitor was home alone, prying to an empty room. No wonder its plastic appeared bluish and dusky, and rapid breathing woke me at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 4 a.m., that crackling plea, "Where are you, Mom?" Like a boy floating in space with a fading radio signal. But what could I do? Shrink myself to a particle? Shave my skin down to pure sound wave and climb up a wire? Find it in death? Maybe that's what it takes. I don't remember pulling the plug. Just the dull red bulb of its eye, then silence falling, but for the moan of my son's clarinet lesson slowly filling the house. The reason I think that I called it Ambush at Still Lake, which is based on a poem I'm not going to read tonight, but in which two fugitives from the 1920s who've been evading capture and robbing banks and got away from the police for years and years, they suddenly decide to go back to the same place twice. They go back to Still Lake, and that's when they're caught. That's when all of the police jump out of the bushes with machine guns. Because I found that with this book, finally, I have stayed put in my life. I am happily married, I have a child, I have a house, etc. And then, mwahaha, this is when all of your past catches up with you and explosions occur in your head. And a lot of shit goes down, I found, when you stay still. There is an ambush that I didn't expect. So this is a little poem called The Standstiller, my proposal for a new ride at Alton Towers. I pick up my souvenir photo, unruffled hair, a steady gaze. Wait, so it literally doesn't move? You ask, windswept from the dodgems. Not a millimeter, I say, rejoining the queue. You suggest the eternal abyss turbo plunge instead. Trust me, I say, this one's scarier. I steer us onto the wheelless train, but at the last moment, you panic and bail. I'll be right here on the platform, you say, waving, as the restraints come down, and off I go, staying beside you. Okay. And then talking about these what ifs, these games that begin the poem, this next one began like that as well. What if I took a pill when I was 17, which then meant I was high for the rest of my life and not responsible for anything until the day of my death, right? Which again is a fun, silly idea, but then like 200 drafts later, it becomes seriouser and seriouser. And it's really important I don't think through any of the implications of these ideas before I start. Then they ambush me. Blessings heaped upon blessings. At 17, I took a pill with my face on it and fell down the swollen hole of my left pupil, emerging at an altar dressed in white, beside a woman the priest called first wife. But my mom seemed happy, so I drank champagne in a hot tub flecked with petals like floating clots, and noticed I was wrist deep in a colleague. Where's my wife? I asked after she'd come, but she looked strangely hurt, throwing my bald socks into her drawer like puppet fists. So for years I was imprisoned in that flat, just loafing to the freezer for ice cream until her waters broke and I slipped on the puddle, missing the birth in A&E. The doctor said I definitely had a substance in my system, but it could just be someone else's blood. Your right arm is burgundy, she said, holding 2 syringes, while your left is hot pink, like the fingernails of the valet who tossed my Ferrari keys. I can't drive, I said, crashing through factory doors. where workers were clapping from the cages of forklift trucks. So, pension secured, I retired to a vintage cottage where third wife wept in bed all day, propped on flowery pillows, her brow mantled with veins like a Victorian strongman straining to lift a boulder. And when I finally said, "Is it something I've done?" she stared with such contemptuous bafflement, I never asked again, till I was old and bound to a rotating chair bed, swiveling and scribbling exclamation marks into a fat leather diary. January 1st, change your life. January 2nd, watch out for that falling chandelier. There's a kind of like emotional protection I found in concentrating on the game of the poem. So with that, I'm thinking in every draft, it took forever. I was thinking, okay, this has got to be one sentence, and I have to find different ways of essentially the speaker blacking out and coming to in different scenarios, because yeah, they have to be kind of be in this fog through their whole life. So I'm like rewriting it, concentrating on the cinematography of the game, and then on events like this, then you read it out and you're like, ouch, that really hurts. But the process of it, there's a sense of misdirection, because you're just like, well, I'm just playing, I'm just unraveling the implications of this silly idea. Vile. I was loading the dishwasher when the clinic rang. I don't know how to say this, she said, which seemed a strange opening sentence for a medical professional. But did you use a sperm donor 3 years ago? Vial 2360? Yes, I said. I didn't particularly like thinking about the donor. It wasn't something I thought about. Well, and we've had several meetings about the protocol around this. It's unprecedented, you see. She sounded like she was vaping. Obviously, we vet all of our donors. There's a long form. We meet them in person, but of course we can't know what they will go on to do in the future. What do you mean? I said. He's the radiator killer. I put the rinse aid down. You know, she went on, that man who chained those girls to boiling hot radiators, then cut out their tongues and led them around on leashes like dogs. The police called us. Apparently, he donated sperm to multiple clinics over a period of 30 years. I grabbed my laptop, searching sperm in my emails. Did you say vial 2360? It's a shock, she said. We used 2361. Her voice was replaced by Vivaldi's Four Seasons. I pressed start on the dishwasher. Okay, thanks for waiting. 2361 is a completely different donor. Please disregard everything I've told you. Have a nice day. Wait, did 2361 do anything bad? I'm sorry, but I'm not able to divulge private information. I'm sure he's lovely. Excuse me, I need to make another call. Okay. And then, you know, sometimes Glyn very kindly talked about like prompts and workshops that and that I run, and in that people will always hear me banging on about this thing about trying to get disqualified from an idea, you know, and occasionally this with this book I would get a seemingly silly idea, and then it would prove to just be the implications were just immense, and the darkness went on and on and on and on, that it was almost, yeah, well, it was horrendous. And this next one was a bit like that. So my friend Laurie Bolger suggested this documentary on Netflix. I can't remember, I think it was called Mermaids or something, but it was about people who are professional mermaids, in the way that they will teach themselves to hold their breath underwater. They have custom made tails. They teach themselves to open their eyes in swimming pools and have to, you know, and it's really quite painful, and they have to smile underwater for long times, and they get terrible headaches because yeah, they are professional mermaids. And so I was like, well, what if there was an addict impersonator contest where people trained to be like drug addicts and to recreate the physical nature of it. And then, yeah, here we go. Bloody hell. The Addict Impersonator Contest is held in Spectre Lake, Arkansas. Every year, the motel signs rearrange their letter tiles, welcome drugettes, and our minibuses arrive to tourniquet bunting and nodding out gnomes, whimsically placed on each lawn, drinking from dog bowls or face down in dirt. The diners advertise overdose buffets, and there's even an icing sugar snorting competition for the kids who call it Summer Halloween and greet us stage coughing, their little nostrils crusted in ketchup. We always have a big reunion the night before, embracing old friends and registering our addict names with the committee. Meth Mouth Molly, Wet Brain Bill, Junkie Jeremy, or something more subtle and arty like Detox Shampoo Dave or DJ Drunkorexia. The judges are looking for three things: visual appearance, physical motion, and inner darkness, or ID. Can I see your ID, babe? Is an industry joke. Yet the sad fact is few can sustain it on stage. Sobriety reclaims their face for 1 second, a telltale flicker of dignity round the eyes, next they're sobbing in the wings, healthy pink stripes down their jaundiced paint. Newbies soon learn there's more to addict impersonation than tattoo track marks and pot noodle fasts. True self-hate takes years to master, like the handstand scorpion pose in yoga or jazz drumming. And any drugette worth their salt, or worth their coke, as we say in the biz, knows you can't win without it. Abscess Alf lived on the streets outside his condo begging for change. DUI Danielle deliberately lost custody of her children and wrote a blog about her experience, which inspired me so much that this year I'd thrown my life savings at a Brazilian heart doctor to teach me a showstopper: silence in the theatre, spotlight on me. I just had to not believe in myself. I focused my mind, replayed my mantra: you're shit, you're shit. Yes, yes, I am. Perfectly executed pupil constriction, moving seamlessly into blue lips, landing in crumpled position, rounded off with an actual death. 10 seconds, 20. I surpassed all rehearsals. Afterwards, the judges clocked it in at 2 minutes and called it the realest routine they'd ever seen. I don't remember much more of the night, just spidery sunspots, but the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was the golden needle trophy on my hospital table and mom and dad crying with pride. Okay, I'm just gonna read 2 short ones and then a longer one. Siblings, there we go. A woman gave birth to the reincarnation of Gilbert and Sullivan. Or rather, 2 reincarnations, one Gilbert, one Sullivan. What are the odds of both being resummoned by the same womb when they could have been a blue dart frog and a supply teacher on separate continents? Yet here they were, squidged into a tandem pushchair with their best work behind them, still smarting from the critical reception of their final opera, described as but an echo of earlier collaborations. The other thing about the dark implications is sometimes they're like really disgusting, because for example in this next poem, because you have to take it. The thing about, I know Glyn said that about not being a surrealist at the beginning, and that's an interesting question, because for me, the metaphor doesn't know it's a metaphor, right? The metaphor thinks it's real. So I have to take it completely seriously. I'm not thinking, oh, this is surreal. It's utterly serious. And in a way logical. So there's the kind of a dream logic to it. So with this next one, I watched one of those documentaries about people who eat stuff that isn't food, you know, like packaged peanuts and soil. And I thought, what if someone became addicted to eating toys? I was surrounded by my son's toys. But then obviously the actual implications of that, when you take it seriously, not as surrealism, as realism unto itself. It gets gross really quickly. Choking hazard. She saw a TV show called Guess What's Inside Her, about an old lady who ate washing powder, then nibbled 2/3 of a 3-seater sofa. And Martha felt seen watching this. She felt lighter because she'd had 17 troll dolls for dinner. It started with Lego, the odd Scrabble letter. Her excrement glittered with unicorn stickers. In spite of bleach cleaning his miniature tractor, it still felt defiled by its passage through Martha. She gagged on Stretch Armstrong for over an hour, like pushing a latex lamb shank through a shredder. But when, for his birthday, Jack got a transformer, an LED ball, and a night sky projector, her belly lit up like a small Blackpool tower. She bleeped as she bled on the toilet in labour, with only a dead plastic clunk to deliver. And no one sends cards and a John Lewis hamper when you shit out a Barbie, then cry a bit after, or snip off the longest umbilical ever to welcome a yo-yo baptized in excretia. Why was the pogo stick gifted by Santa? As snow fell outside, she was found by her partner, a pool of blood darkly dilating beneath her, muttering, "Baby, I don't know how it got there." And I'm going to finish with a poem which is inspired by a bit of toddler logic that my son gave me when he was 3 years old, which also, actually, if you unravel it, leads you to dark places. Thank you for listening. Dream job. It's the last one on the page, last one on the document. Vic, thanks. The 3-year-old boss of our imaginary cafe is conducting his daily stocktake. Cabbages? Yes. Chocolate? Yes. Carrots? He looks around, consults his palm like a clipboard. "Here you are," I say, magicking a bunch from my pocket. "Fresh and crunchy." He stares at me. "That's not carrots," he says. "That's nothing." So it is. Business suffers. No pretend biscuits. No pretend milk. I ring up our wholesale distributor. The dial tone is fuzzy, fleshy. "That's not a phone, that's your hand." Fuck. I've made international calls from this number. Lucrative deals. Yesterday, we sold pizza, horses, islands, trains with personalized choo-choos, you name it, we had it. Now suddenly, the opposite. Peas, no. Eggs, no. Chicken, no. It's an emptying, an exodus, invisible shelves all bare. Already I can picture a throng of disgruntled customers banging down our doors, shouting, "Call this a tomato," demanding refunds when the money just isn't there. And the boss, he's so calm, poking Play-Doh in his office, like he's been fudging discrepancies in the books for some time, watching his Ponzi scheme crash. And pretty soon, he knows the Ninors will come, and he'll turn to me, handcuffed, and say, "Wasn't it great while it lasted though, Mom? Didn't we want for nothing?" Thank you. Oh, it's so hot. You can unmute now, Glyn.
I should be audible now. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much. I would be applauding, but I don't know if it's allowed on the thing. I'm sure they're all applauding. I can see they are. I can see the symbols. Terrific. Just to say then, there's a Q&A thing and there's a chat thing, and if you want to ask questions that I can relay to Caroline, I need to either see them on the chat or the Q&A, and I don't know. I'm going to look at the chat because it's what I'm used to. So put them in the chat if you have a question. I'm going to ask a couple first. My first question is actually a sort of roundabout way of getting Caroline to read another poem. It's very short. And you contractually don't have to read it. I'll read it if you want me to. But I was thinking about because when people, I think people encounter your verse, I mean, if they're poets and they've got anything about them, they would be thinking, how do you do what you do? And I think, I've heard this from my poets when I've seen that their versions, which are often admirable, that come from sort of prompts and provocations or just inspiration from your work, they're not quite the same. They're similar, but they're not quite the same. So there is a distinct thing you do, and it's this. Would you read How Was Everything? It's on 70, and it's probably
that is short. That is short.
It's the shortest poem in it.
Strictly speaking, it's a sonnet because it's got a word on every line, 14 lines. Yeah. How is everything? The vulture circles like a waitress on roller skates, asking, "Have you finished with that?"
So when I encountered that, I thought, I have found a purest distillation of birdness here. This is it. Because 999 poets out of 1,000 would say the waitress circles the waitress circles on roller skates like a vulture, asking, have you finished with that? But Caroline does the vulture circles like a waitress on roller skates, asking, have you finished with that? Which seems to me just immeasurably better. And I suppose that this...
Well, because it's about it's not a kind of it's not about the waitress. It's the picture in my head is of basically the body on the slab
yes.
that isn't dead, but the vulture is like, well, you've kind of given up, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, in my head, there's no amusement. I'm just then thinking, what is a good clash, and how do I describe the circling? And then, I mean, that poem was about like 2 pages long, and then I found I cut pretty much everything else away apart from that. But I think it's because it's not funny when I'm writing it. Like, generally, the funnier the poem is, the more like I'm writing it thinking, this is impenetrably miserable. This is basically like a suicide note, and then I read it out and people are like, ha ha ha, like, fuck you. No, not really, but it's both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what I love about that is that the two things, the vulture and the waitress, are just equal. They're balanced. It's not like one thing looks like the other, or the other. I just think they're both present, and to me that's really hard to do and really rare. So I know. And then I suppose, I mean, I know you were reading Tate at least, and maybe others, like in your early teens, a long time ago. And I suppose I'm just asking, where did that sort of, you called it a game a couple of times. We know it's not a game, but you called it, that playfulness that masks or doesn't mask, that is serious. Where did it come from? Where did you start realizing that's what you did? Was there a time was there a sudden moment?
I know, I think it's been slightly different in each one. Like with the Air Year, it was much more about like knitting from nothing. Like sometimes I would just have a first line, but it didn't even have an idea in it, and then or it just had an image. And then with this one, a lot of them worked like upside down jokes. So I'd start with what seemed like a funny idea, and then just take it completely seriously. So by the end, I'm not laughing at all anymore. And I that must just be to do with, our themes are always just how we are during the time that we're writing it, aren't they? I think my masks have got thinner a bit over the years. Like, I used to hide more, and I feel like that the generally now if something about the emotional state isn't coming through the poem, then I'm not happy with it. I'm not happy unless it feels uncomfortably exposing by the end. But I'd never know when I'm going to get to that point or how I'm going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, I mean, I loved the Air Year, but I thought that was it was sort of more sculpted down, I felt, in Ambush. I thought it was, and I hadn't thought of it like that, but perhaps it's more, do you feel it's more exposing? Do you feel you were ready to mask less in some way, to costume less?
I don't think we're ever like completely ready for it either. And I think also, as I said, because I write them in the first person, sometimes it can seem like I'm confessing more than I am, you know, like that I'm kind of or like completely locked in a psychotic episode whilst writing the poem, you know, and I have done certain gigs where people have been really genuinely quite concerned for me, right? Um, and but it's not really like that. As I said, when I'm writing it, I am taking it completely seriously, but I'm able to focus on the game of just like, well, this is real. Okay, so if everyone's coming to the wedding, who is there? Who's there? This and then what? Then what happens? And the feelings are just subconscious. So it's a bit like I'm trying to like dream while I'm awake. So I know that the feelings will be there because the image is the emotion, just like in a dream. But I don't need to concentrate on that bit. I can just concentrate on the theatre of the poem, you know, yeah, thinking the how do I paint the vulture and the waitress, etc. And then afterwards, reading it back, because we're our own first readers, aren't we? Then I can tell whether or not it actually has any effect on me. And if it doesn't, I've got to redraft it.
Yeah, yeah. You said right towards the end of the reading you are or were or are now surrounded by your son's toys, and I mean there's quite sort of presence of children in the air year. There's that beautiful Little Children poem and others, but there's a lot in Ambush. Of course, they're not. You know, they're in your realm. They're upside down, or they're turned around, or you know they're. But there's something about the sort of the presence of the child in the poems that is it a kind of moral center for you? Is it a constant in some way? Because I mean you're relatively new to it, right? That's fair to say. But yeah.
I don't know. Like all of the poems that have my son in them often began from a piece of his like toddler logic, like, oh, we've run out of invisible carrots. So then I'm just thinking through the implications. Okay, well, what next? You know, if we run out of pretend carrots, what next are we going to run out of? And then, or like when he said to me that the job of a fireman is to go around with a fire hose putting all the water out. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, what are the implications of that job? Because that's much harder than going around putting all the fire out. You're gonna go around putting all the water out. And so or sometimes there's a child that features almost like a character in the poems, like turning up at a wedding and he's at the wedding and he's 3 years old, but he says he's working for the CIA and you're not my real mom, etc. So he's in it, but the poems aren't really about. I wasn't trying to write a poem about him. I was writing a poem either inspired by a piece of his imagination or in which, you know, he was kind of, a character. And that because our poems are just haunted and knitted from our lives. So I don't know a moral center, that doesn't seem right. But if he wasn't in it, it would be like, well, I'm not putting my full, you know, I'm not going all in with this book. And there's so much like guilt and worry and, you know, as well as like wonder and all of that stuff in the book. But yeah, toddler logic actually works quite well with how I write. You know, it's like, okay, I can write a poem about going around putting all the water out. I might not be able to write a really moving poem about childbirth, you know, but I can write one about, you know, being skewered on a pogo stick. Maybe that's my version.
Yes, and ends up being about a very fine poem about childbirth in your style, you know. I have a question from the world of chat from Bradley Taylor, who asks, he heard you on the Verb talking about swinging the door open on a poem idea. Does this happen at the same time as the what if? Is there an idea moment, or is there time between them where the idea snowballs in your head?
That's such a good question. Yes, so yeah, with the Verb I was talking about the A, and I was talking about flinging open the door of a first line, and that I would have this game of just writing the first line and just slaloming in. and building the road as I was walking down it. And then for that, speed is really important. You can't, because as the Robert Lowell quote where he says, writing is not the record of an event, it is the event. So if you think for too long about it, you will write the record of an event that's occurred in your head. And the writing itself has to be the first moment of discovery, like where an image begets another image and the language pings off against each other. But with the what ifs, it was even more important that I didn't ponder for ages about what this might look like, or okay, I had to write it, because there's a censoring that occurs in the head where you start putting things together almost like a television narrative of like, oh, that makes sense, I'll bring that in, and then maybe a bit of that and bit of that, and we don't realize, but we kind of, there's like a script conference occur in your head, and which makes it tamer. Whereas if you're writing, it's like you lock in each part of the pavement of like, oh, no turning back, oh, a man has arrived, oh, and then this has happened, and then and you have to just respond moment to moment, which in the end will lead to a more daring first draft than if I've thought through all the implications in my head and, you know, unwittingly swerved away from the ones that feel more uncomfortable.
So a little bit, yeah, like when you have fragments of a dream and you start trying to make sense of it as if it had made sense. We sort of helplessly do that, I think.
Exactly. But sometimes none of the words from my first draft will actually remain. It will just be like I'm painting it, you know, and then I will redraft, and sometimes it will look completely unrecognizable. But it's, if I haven't had those moments of discovery in the first draft, I can edit it to death and make it as pretty as, you know, the layout, oh, perfect, everything. It'll just be like giving mouth to mouth to a log. Like, it just doesn't work because I didn't take a risk at the beginning. And that's what I just find every time. But
I was really struck when you said talking about the waitress and the vulture. Did you say that was several pages? I mean, did you really cut that down from?
Yeah. There was loads and loads, you know, and I think it came from, it was a poem about spies, and something to do with people like who could remember, like they've been programmed to do violence in previous lives, or I can't remember. It was rubbish. It wasn't working, and then someone died, and then yeah, and then we ended up there, and then I kind of, that was the only bit that I liked, and I cut it all away, and found but that often happens, like with short poems or with sonnets. Generally, they are accidents at the end, like a clearing at the end of a long forest of nonsense. I have so much nonsense. I wrote, like, you know, I spent 4 hours writing a shit poem about Kermit the Frog. I have so many B-sides from this book, complete utter failures and messes. Like, what, you know, why have I spent like 3 days writing this poem where like God is a drunk, and I'm trying to, it's a crap, you know.
Well, you've let in the writing committee, haven't you? You've let in the writers' room, and they're starting to sow doubts. Do you ever go back to any of the stuff that went onto the floor? Do you ever go back to it?
Occasionally, but, you know, not it. Generally, there was something that was not quite true from the beginning in it. There's something forced from the beginning.
I've got another one for you, which is rather good. This is from Lisa Kelly, and she says, your poetry reminds me of Cabaret. That's already going well. Fun in the face of fucking doom. Can't argue with that. How does your poetry acknowledge this awful era with the personal, and where do you go from here?
Oh, I don't know. Like, definitely this book has got a feeling of kind of domestic apocalyptic. Like, when I was like reading it as a whole, I was like, you know, and but I've not done any of that on purpose, obviously. But I think there definitely is a sense that our homes are not, and there's no difference. There's no difference between home and horror a lot of the time. You know, it's just it's everywhere, and it seeps into everything, and it reflects back off things. So even if you try to write, you know, a poem that's just set in your own kitchen and it becomes about war, like poems, that they have a way of doing that, of reflecting a subconscious, but you can't do it on purpose at the same time, otherwise it becomes mannered. I don't know where I go from here. Like at the end of every book, I generally go through a period of thinking I'll never write a poem again. I feel like a blown up shed suspended in the midair, and then something comes back around. But it's like one obsession finishes, and so after this, I'll probably try to write some more poems, and then I'll realize that they are ambush at Still Lake poems, and I've already written them, right? And I'll be trying to write new poems, but they won't work because my new obsession, whatever that will be, hasn't formed yet. So then I'll be particles in the air, like this blown up shed, and then it'll reform. I mean, at least that's what's happened every other time. Although poetry has a way of just making you wait just long enough so you think, oh no, this time it's actually gone for good. This time it's abandoned me. And just then, when you give up, it comes back.
I think we've all got no man's lands between books, with the odd poem wandering around that was too early or too late, somehow. I've got another good one coming in. I'll take one more from out there because of the time, and then we'll start to wrap it up. I've got one more for you after that. This is from Laura McKee, and
hello.
It's Caroline, how would you describe your own physical reaction when you know that you've taken the poem far enough in terms of being honestly revealing of something emotional?
Like physical reaction?
Yeah.
Well, it plays out in lots of different ways. Like to begin with, when it's just me alone in the privacy of my imagination, the physical reaction is always when it's not getting there. You know, when it keeps on. I keep realizing I've swerved away or been evasive or something. Then when I finally do, like, feel like I've kind of pressed on a bruise in some way, but it's not necessarily, the truth isn't direct, right? If I'm feeling an indirect, like, on discomfort to the truth, then the poem has to reflect that same indirectness somehow. But so I feel satisfied when it happens, like for a moment, I feel at peace. And then when I actually show it to somebody or read it out, I feel like I've got a massive hole in my chest and it's awful. And I'm like, why have I done this? Why have I done this to myself? And in every different reading with different reactions, it is crazy to me. The job is just to make sure that we can never get used to the effect that it's going to have on us. And the same poem can you slightly, like, take chips out of us continually whenever we read it. And also, bizarrely, the moment it stops taking chips out of you, you think, well, I've got to put that to bed for a bit, because that's become a bit safe for me now. I better read something that destroys me instead. I mean, what are we like?
Absolutely. I've got one more question before we wrap up. It just hypothetically, Caroline, you don't have to answer this or act upon it at all, but I feel I'm speaking for the crowd. If there was, in a hypothetical realm, a chance to read one more short poem before this ended, which poem would that be?
I would probably read the last poem in the book. Just maybe. Why? Do you have a request?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me what to do, Glenn, instead of all of this about which one.
I'd love to hear you read that.
Which one?
You're
But
going to read.
you do want me to read the last poem in the book?
Well, look, I'd love you to read any of them, but it should be quite a shorter one. And if that's the one that came to mind, let's go with that.
I will read that. Okay. Yeah, so this was an accidental sonnet that was much longer and went on for ages, and then I fell into this bit. Thank you so much for coming, by the way. Dot and Maud. After 3 decades of bed death, it's a shock to find our oh, bloody hell. I'll start again.
My fault.
Yeah, exactly. Dot and Maud. Right, hang on. After 3 decades of bed death, it's a shock to find our technique much improved. Like we're graduates of a 30-year night school with modules on clenching and moaning. What's got into us? Who are these hijackers wrestling the yoke from our dozing crew, piloting us into the sun? Did you see that? Our souls ejected from our bodies, now entwining above us like tandem skydivers, or the enormous gloved hands of a Spanish puppeteer, let's call her Dolores, who when walking one day, in despair for her life, spotted 2 old puppets gazing blankly from a bin and seized upon us, crying, "They're perfect."
Let us show our appreciation for the wonderful Caroline Bird. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you, Vic. And thank you, Carcanet.